Welcome to I Said What I Said, a sports podcast giving you opinions not heard anywhere else. I'm your host, Brad Wakai, alongside my co-host, Tyson Gentry. Tyson, first of all, this is an emergency podcast, basically. Now, you were sick, so we couldn't quite get out in emergency fashion, but we got a lot to talk about because Nick Saban has retired from the University of Alabama. He's no longer going to be the head coach.
Just one more time, just so we can all hear it again. It's so crazy right now. And first off, right off top, sorry to all the YouTube people for my glasses. I'm sick. There's a winter weather advisory. It's dry. I can't wear my contacts. Yeah, dude, Nick Saban being out is like at the same time, it was always inevitable. Like we knew it was coming, but it's also like you're still pinching yourself because this is the greatest, we were talking, should we do his legacy? And it's like, no, everyone knows this is the best to ever do it. It's not particularly close, but he built essentially two programs, Brad. Like he brought LSU to national relevance in the early 2000s with the national championship there. They sustained that success, right? And then obviously 6 times that at Alabama and kind of built Georgia with the Kirby Smart hire, kind of built a lot of these other schools around the SEC. So everybody's asking who's taking over, but let's just stop for a second. And just think about what next year is going to be like without Nick Saban on the sideline.
It just feels weird that he's not going to be there because when we go through our preseason and next week, for those who are listening and consume our content, we're going to be doing a way too early look ahead at the new college football season. We got transfer portal stuff still to go. Now, Saban, who's going to be backing out. So we'll talk about this, what it means for Bama here pretty soon and who the next coach is going to be. But like you said, without him on the sideline, without the prospect of Nick Saban coaching an Alabama team, with all that talent, they were just recruited the second best class in the 2024 recruiting class, according to 24/7. So it's not like the guy was losing his fastball, like it's the end of, Mac Brown at Texas or a couple of these legends, Bobby Bowden at Florida State, where, they weren't really hitting the recruiting trail hard. Like this was a machine down there, Tyson.
Not only that, did you see the report of what his day entailed yesterday? How he was doing assistant coach meetings until 3:55 p.m. Retirement announcement at 4. This dude's a monster.
You said it. We're not going to go into his legacy, but I think if you look around college football and just the impact that he's had, I think, and maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but under his watch since he's taken over the reign, college football popularity has exploded in this country. And people hate juggernauts and people hate villains, but every time there's a villain in sports, it feels like the ratings go up. Right. And Alabama for the longest time was that villain that you love to hate. And Nick Saban, he's a grouchy guy and he's crabby and, he won. So it was easy to hate him. I'm going to miss Nick Saban on the sideline. I respect Nick Saban. I respect Alabama. I know a lot of people it was low hanging fruit to hate him and to hate what they built there. And to do what he did in the most competitive conference with absolutely insane boosters, crazed fans, and that have the domination that he had over that conference for as long as he did is so impressive. And I think you can see the trickle down, like you said, to Georgia. I mean, we're talking about Oregon now, who's recruiting at a high level. That's a direct guy from Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning coming off of his tree. Like, just go through different programs on the country. Nick Saban has an influence on basically all of it now in the modern day college football era.
Oh, speaking of Prince, are going to be on college football for like the next 100 years. Like we're going to be looking back, and it's going to be that Mike Holmgren tree, but maybe a forest at this point for everybody. And the worst part to me, Brad, is this the end of the college football coaching rehab where he would just host a burnout or a flame out or Lane Kiffin, a Steve Sarkisian, take your pick of names, and then 2 years later they're coaching like high level college football teams?
Probably. I mean, because what other place would you rather
go?
Right? Like Georgia? I don't know. I mean, Kirby's a great recruiter, a great defensive coach, but like Nick had his hands on everything that was involved in that program. Like, yeah, he had his offensive coordinators and you can do your thing and, you're running it, but you better know Nick's going to be coming in those meetings if he thinks something smells a little bit different there. And that's the thing about Nick Saban. Like he just basically with Belichick, right? And, this is a college football podcast. We won't touch on that, but the guys just knew so much about the sport, so much about the game itself that he could jump into the different rooms. And how many times we talked about, Tyson, all these Alabama defensive backs look so great in college and they get to the NFL and they're not getting coached by Nick Saban. And you're like, okay, maybe Nick Saban does know what he's doing.
And they went through a million assistant coaches over his tenure, especially like the last couple of years. Like Kevin Steele was there at the beginning, and then he's there at the end, and there's 15 people in between his tenures. It's just, I think one thing to caution is like next year, if they win the national championship, or if they win one within the next 4 years, don't jump over head over heels because this was the new guy. These are, it's like when Les Miles won in 2003 or 7 with Saban's recruiting class. It's like, yeah, that's awesome, but can you coach? Can you recruit here? Granted, when there's $1 trillion in the NIL fund and your endowment and everything, it's going to make things a little bit easier for these guys. But how long until it's Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium?
Oh man, it's got to be
soon.
That's
right?
Tough. It's got to be
like 72. You got to get it done. Relatively quickly. Well, you can still move around.
He looks great though. I will say, like when people you say 72, you're like, man, I wouldn't have pictured that with Nick. He looks good still.
Who wins a fight, Nick Saban or Pete Carroll? Is that okay to ask? Are we gonna get removed?
Well, no, I think people do that. I mean, what you had the NC State coach saying he was going to fight Steve Smith.
That's true. That was hilarious.
So here's the thing. I think Pete might have more energy. Like he may bob and weave a little
Nick's
bit.
Nick's gonna bite him.
Yeah, Nick's dirty. I feel like he'd take it to the ground.
He'd bite him. He'd make a couple phone calls, and some Alabama rug salesman would show up and clean up the entire apartment.
Let me see if we can get a tail of the tape here too. But I'm trying to get some height on Pete Carroll if that's even possible. But I think so. This is what I think. Pete's going to take over Lee Corso. I'm sorry, Nick Saban's going to take over Lee Corso's job on game day. Like that just feels like a perfect match. No.
Well, make game day about college football again. That'd be, the number one thing that would come out of that. I think that'd be good for everybody. I envision him getting an office in some building in Tuscaloosa, whatever one he wants, and essentially, working in air quotes at some new position. But he's still like this guy. He's not just going away, man. Like he's addicted to football. He's always going to be addicted to football.
Pete Carroll 5'11", Nick Saban 5'6". So we're looking at major reach advantage for Pete.
It's huge. It's going to be really tough if Nick wants to combat that. But he's he's grouchy or I don't know. He's grouchy scrappy. And he's scrappy. Yeah, that's what I was going for there. But dude, I mean, what you're gonna Pete Carroll's gonna just sprawl when Nick goes digging? I don't think so, dude. We're suplex.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, is it a UFC fight or is it a boxing fight? I feel like that's what changes the equation a little bit here.
I don't think either one of those guys want to box. I think both of them are too pure. They want the real fight, dude.
All right. Well, if it happens, one of those celebrity boxing matches, Nick and Pete, we'll see what happens there. But what does this mean for Alabama, right? And we alluded to it a little bit, and Tyson said, when the new guy comes in, we'll discuss who we think that might be next, some of the hot names here soon that could be rumored here. What does this mean for Alabama, though, without Nick Saban on that sideline? Because whoever takes that job is going to be in the shadow of Nick. If things don't go well, it's going to be a tough thing to sell. Like, no, I know what we're doing here. Because it's Alabama. Like Nick Saban was getting pressure when they didn't win the SEC championship.
Bro, they lost like 30 games in 100 years.
This is, to me, yes, it's a great job. It's an incredible place to coach. It's a factory. You can get talent. It's Alabama. It's back. It's the allure of Bama is still going to be there now that Nick Saban brought it back. But if something goes wrong, the boosters are crazy. Nick Saban at least had enough cachet and knew what he was doing that he could stymie some of that. I'm curious to know what they do here. And Tyson, in the immediate term, I will say, and I'll throw it to you. We already had a decommitment in 2024 class. Some people in 2025 are starting to look elsewhere. All the players who signed their national letter of intent because Saban retired, they can get out of that. So this may be a Wild West. So we may be looking at a team who had the number 2 overall rated class according to 24/7 Sports in 2024. They could be dropping down now. I don't want to say out of the top 10. I think they're still going to retain quite a bit of talent. But we could be looking at a depleted class coming in for the first-year guy.
And one thing to, obviously monitor, I think they get a month. They get 30 days to hit the transfer portal and make a decision if you're on that roster right now. And then obviously whoever takes the job, that team will then get a month to hop in the transfer portal and potentially follow the guy to Alabama or go somewhere else, probably in the Northwest if these rumors are to be believed. But I think what it means for Alabama is, like you mentioned, coaches not wanting the job because the expectation is going to be a little bit too high, and it is. But I think you're underestimating a little bit the amount of college football coaches that are in it to win versus the amount of college football coaches that are like, yo, if I get $100 million contract and I go 10-2 3 years in a row, I get canned and I get $70 million to not coach at that school. I can go wherever I want. I think that's something for the Alabama boosters and AD and all those guys. That's like, you're not as far away from being Texas A&M as you were 24 hours ago. Let's just put it that way. I'm not saying they're gonna fall off, but like Tom Osborne's Nebraska team, right? Or we saw this like it happens all the time. A legendary coach leaves, the next guy goes 8-5 once. He's ran out of town, and then there's some instability. And everything fades. So I think you got to get this one right, just for nothing else than kind of steadying the ship. Because if it does go 10-2, 10-2, 8-5, that's gonna be brutal. Like first of all, you're gone, but also who knows what your LSU's and your Ole Misses and your Georgias and your Floridas and all the other SEC schools are looking like in 3 years. It changes so fast, and unfortunately for the rest of us, fortunately for them, Alabama hasn't really had to play that game. You don't quite get it yet. You're going to learn.
Just look recently at what happened with USC. Pete Carroll leaves. They haven't even sniffed the dominance that they had when he was there. And that was, 19 years ago-ish?
And the expectations were probably 3/4 as high as they're going to be for the next Alabama.
So that's the difficulty here when you talk about it. So I think in the short term, that whoever comes in here, the responsibility too with NIL and these boosters, they're going to have to make a pitch on their own here to keep these kids, not just the recruits coming in, but the ones on the roster. Like, these are Saban's guys. They have, with the turnover from the staff, they're there because they're at Alabama and because of Nick Saban. The development and getting to the NFL, the development they're going to be able to have under Nick Saban's tutelage and coaching while at Alabama. The ability to grow as a man, whatever he was telling them in the recruiting pitch, we're not there. It worked. They had elite recruiting classes under his tenure.
Dropping jewelry on the table. That's all he needed to do.
The opportunity to compete, like they're gonna have a tough deal here. I would not be shocked. Now we're also talking about Alabama team who's coming in fourth in the betting odds to win the championship next year. I gotta imagine that dips. Maybe you plug and play with someone else, right? But I think there's an edge here. Like, they're kind of teetering, and I don't want to say complete disaster because it's Bama and you don't want to put anything past them. But before Nick Saban arrived, let's not forget they were not a successful program. Like, we think of them as a machine now. If they don't get this right, especially with how college football is now, Tyson, they could have a little bit of trouble here.
And we'll know definitively in about 2027, right? 2028. So it's hard. They're going to be good for the next couple of years because they just have better players than everybody. Plus, by the time we know, Brad, there'll be a new football subdivision anyways.
True. That's a good point. So let's move here to close. The next Alabama coach, because there's been a lot of names. Now, Dan Lanning was the popular one. He came out with an awesome video, like a recruiting pitch. Like you said, no, I'm staying at Oregon. I think for what he built there, it makes sense. Like, why would you uproot immediately? You have resources there. You have a stranglehold on that Northwest right now. Yes, it's not Alabama yet, but that's what you're trying to build, and you have a good program there. Other names, Dabo Swinney, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is a popular one, Mike Norvell at Florida State. I see Kirby Smart. That seems crazy to me. But these are just names that people are throwing out. James Franklin at Penn State's been a name because he was at Vanderbilt before. When you listen to these, Kalen DeBoer at Washington, that's another name getting floated around. Mike Vrabel, who was just let go by the Titans. When you're listening to these names, is there anything that jumps out to you that you're like, okay, I can see that working? I would see them leaving their current position to go to Alabama.
Well, obviously, you start with Sark and Lane because they were at Alabama and they're familiar with the program and those things. I was thinking to myself yesterday, like, how poor of timing for the Alabama boosters when Sark now has been to the college football playoff and has built Texas into a top team, and Lane Kiffin is going to start the year next year probably sniffing the top 5, if not in it, at Ole Miss, right? Like, the two guys that you kind of – Jimbo is gone, right? Like, they're not hiring Jimbo Fisher. We don't know for sure if they've met with or who they've met with. Like we just keep, these are the guys they'd like to interview. One
Mm-hmm.
guy, Brad, that I haven't seen mentioned a whole bunch, but I haven't been checking, very, very, I hate the reporting on it. Sucks. Like when Dan Lanning was on a plane yesterday and then today he's not going. Eli Drinkowitz, man. I'm
Ooh.
giving him a call. I like what he did at Missouri. The fact that to me it seems relatively low risk, right? Because this isn't a this is an up and coming head coach that already knows your recruiting area, has built a program in your conference to heights that we didn't think it could reach, right? Culminating what they finished 7 or something this season, and then on top of it, like if it doesn't work, nobody's gonna be mad at you for hiring Eli Drinkowitz if that doesn't work. But if you hire Lane Kiffin and that thing doesn't work, well, we told you it wasn't going to work. If you hire Sark and it doesn't work, we told you that was never going to work. If you promote from inside, there will be a riot
Oh my God.
in Tuscaloosa. So I don't know how many guys, like you mentioned, want the job, and how many guys are feeling confident enough to be like, yeah, I'm going to do at least as good as Bray Bryant, which is a distant second, which is a crazy thing to say.
Yeah, and Eli's not. That's a good thought, right? Like at Missouri, like he's in the South now. He was at Appalachian State. He's been recruiting the South for a while, and like you said, I mean, he recruited a really good class in 2024 at Missouri. They don't have even close to the same pedigree, same amount of money, same booster level, NIL money that Alabama has. So imagine what he does if he can take that program over. That's at least one to think about. That's interesting. I think I want to attack it from the names that are on the list here. I think Sarkisian, that's an easy one to point to. If I'm him, why? If I'm replacing people at Texas that were failures, and I can build up, like they're happy that I just made it to the CFP. I'm going to leave this situation with a ton of money, ton of opportunity. My recruiting class is there, my stranglehold on Texas, and then go to Alabama and replace that guy. Like, what's the benefit here? Like, sure, it'd be great. Like, so you go from Texas, who's a top 8 program, to Bama, who's the number 1 program. Okay, sure. But what's the negative side of that? If you fail there, Tyson, that's your 3rd head coaching job you failed at. No,
Yeah.
4th, right? Washington, USC. You left Texas. That's a burnt bridge. And then Bama, if you get canned. That's not a great look. Mike Norvell's a hot name. I think that'd be a disaster. He's a people are loving him now. And sure, he's done a good job at Florida State. He was on the hot seat a year and a half ago at Florida State. This is Florida.
They are getting hit. They're getting hit with some sanctions for some NIL violations, I guess. So maybe that's like one small thing to monitor here. There's a lot of jumping ship and finger pointing when things go south.
If they want to take a swing, I think Vrabel, but he has no connection there. He's an Ohio State guy. I'm not sure if that's something he's interested in going into college. I think he would crush it there. That guy in our room recruiting, I think it'd be a powerhouse. I think he'd bring a different style of mentality to the program while keeping it still a grinder. But I don't know if he wants to do the recruiting thing. I don't know if there's a connection that he has to Alabama that would make him leave the NFL, because he's going to get an NFL job on this cycle. And then going through the rest of them, Tyson, I mean, Dabo's got 150% buyout if he wants to leave. Like, he's going to have to pay 150% of his contract.
They're not paying for Dabo Swinney, man. Like maybe 3 years ago if this happened, but not now.
Lane Kiffin is the one that I think to really keep an eye on. Nick and him have, like, yes, it got a little frosty at points, but there's a respect there. There's a mutual understanding. I think the difficulty with handing the keys over to Lane is he has not recruited well at Ole Miss. Now, is that because of the demographic? It's because Ole Miss, maybe if it's at Alabama, it's different. It kind of recruits itself in a way compared to Ole Miss. Lane doesn't necessarily get on the recruiting trail. So Nick would go into living rooms. Nick would be out there scouting. He had his thing. He wanted to be involved in recruiting, and it just hasn't quite happened for Lane there. But I do think that's a legit option for Alabama. I can't believe we're saying this 5 years removed.
It's pretty funny. Also, I just can't. If that happens, or if Kalen DeBoer happens, which we were talking, he's apparently doing a radio interview tomorrow morning in Washington. It'd be a weird place for him to announce he's going to Alabama. But the Bama fans will be pissed at the way the team is playing football. And I think that's a pretty drastic shift, right? Like, you want Mike Norvell. That's cool. But you're also accustomed to 20 years of fantastic offensive lines. That wasn't the case at Florida State until this season, when everything kind of clicked, right? And last year was one of the worst position groups there is. So there's going to be drawbacks to all of these guys. For me, I think they could do a lot better for themselves if they didn't pick the biggest name out of the hat.
Any closing remarks you want to have? Anything you want to touch on before we get out of here?
He's got to be on the cover of the new NCAA football video game, right?
Oh, he's
Like
got to be.
he's got to be. Like everyone was saying, they should do all the athletes that they missed in like some sort of montage. I'm saying, I mean,
No.
it's EA Sports, right? So we're gonna get a goat mode for $300 with Nick Saban on the cover, but he's got to be on.
Oh, they used to do Madden on the cover of the original Maddens. Why not with the new edition of NCAA put Nick Saban on there?
Nick Saban's college football.
Give us a call, EA Sports. We'll make you money. All right. Well, Nick Saban's retired. We can't believe it. Like, we're going to have a ton of fallout from this based on who Alabama's going to hire. If it's one of these top programs, there's going to be other replacements, things like that. So in the meantime, stay tuned to anything else we got coming on college football. We got more NFL stuff for you fans out there as we preview Super Wildcard Weekend. Like, subscribe, and share the show. Smash that like button on the way out and hit subscribe so you don't miss anything. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.